Step back again and again. Step back from the stepping back itself constantly, together with everything at once. This will cleanse the mind that relates towards all things, which is mental karma. It's not about mental karma. Step back again and again from itself. That is automatic cleansing through the emptiness and extinction. The mind relating towards all things is called mental karma. Mental karma is just assumed up to utilize it temporarily. But whenever it's a habit for a long time, it becomes an attachment towards mental karma. Therefore, mental karma is the beginning of all karma through words, thoughts and actions. That is just karma relating to karma. Therefore, dissolve the utilizing of the mind. Step back from the stepping back itself. Cut to both cut and not cut. Step back from cutting and not cutting. That is true cutting, through cleansing of the extinction and emptiness. Step back dissolving itself. Stepping back cleanses itself, is ending itself. With this it will turn into cleansing of the emptiness and extinction truly for samsara. And proceed all together with the great compassion so that there is a cleansing. Enable to step back from the stepping back itself, enable to discard the discarding itself. With this it will be beyond the act of the suffering. Mental karma is the act of suffering. Mental karma. Not grasping for the non-grasping itself, enable it. Enable to step back from the stepping back itself. Cut to both cut and not cut, enable it. Enable to not grasping for both grasping and not grasping. With this, it will be automatically cleansing through the extinction and emptiness. This is not about the mind relating towards all things. It's not the system of mental karma. Samsara is not to be related with karma. Cleansing of the extinction and emptiness is not the system of karma. Physical, verbal and mental is not in the system of karma. Therefore, be aligned with the essential codes that has been given. Step back from cutting and not cutting, so that it's not just about cutting and not cutting. Step back from cutting and not cutting, so that it's not limited to just my or not my, cutting or not cutting. Then it's true cutting. That is not about anything within cutting, that has no trace of cutting. step back from cutting and not cutting, then it will be true cutting, which is not about cutting itself. Mai that is doesn't have itself, that is left within itself. This is not just about mai or cutting. Step back from the stepping back.
พร้อมกันทุกอย่างเลย
Together with everything as once. Cutting, deluded knowing, all at once, which is everything at once together. Both cutting and not cutting, both cutting and not cutting, all together at once with everything. This is not about having steps with one or two things at a time. That is suffering act. That is practicing the suffering act about cutting one or two things at a time. This is at once, all together at once. Once not grasping for both grasping and not grasping is with everything at once, ending all the worries and burdens, dissolving all the burdens and worries at once. Once step back from the stepping back itself, it's at once with everything, stopping the cycle of karma, all the same. Not to become karma and the causes of karma, all the same for everything. Mai, step back from mai and not mai. Not grasping, step back from grasping and not grasping, then it will be true mai, true not grasping. Step back from the stepping back itself, ending the ending itself. This is not about stepping back from anything. Step back from the stepping back itself. To step back, then step back from the stepping back itself. All together with everything at once, ending all about blossoming and closing, to be limited with just that. That is just about suffering act. Once everything, not grasping for both grasping and not grasping, all at once, that is helping through unwinding and releasing at once, all together. To just sink in stillness and indifference is already a delay, and then guarding samsara already in such a way. Tiny bit of sinking in stillness, that is guarding the realms of the mind. Not grasping for the non-grasping itself and the grasping itself. Step back from the body and mind and all things and everything. Step back from the stepping back itself. Step back from the stepping back itself. And proceed all together at once, so that there is the extinction and emptiness that is cleansing all together with everything. Step back from the body and the mind and all things. Step back from my and not my, from cutting and not cutting. Step back from the stepping back itself. Step back from the stepping back itself. This will end the desire and delusive attachment that overlays the body and mind and all things. Whatever that is overlaying will be dissolved. The delusive attachment, the desire that is overlaying, being obsessed with identifying, desire overlaying the mind and all things further on, that is samsara. Therefore, step back from cutting and not cutting. Step back from the stepping back itself. The stepping back ends itself. To be busy with identifying with body and the mind, the desire overlays. Just my to both my and not my, cut to both cut and not cut. So that it will be infinitely. When there is no burden about overlaying anything, overlaying the body and mind, no burdens that overlaying all things, this is no limits and infinite. To be busy with identifying, that is the desire still overlaying. Having burdens, having worries and concerns, and then falling into limitations to a certain extent, to certain realms of existence, being limited. Not grasp for both grasping and not grasping fully, so that there is no limit, so that it is infinite. There is no need to be busy, sitting, lying down with limitations. To be limited with just mind or cutting, that is being stuck with just cutting. Cut to both cut and not cut. Not grasping for both grasping and not grasping. Then it will end all about grasping or not grasping, cutting or not cutting. Cut to both cut and not cut, it will end all about cutting and not cutting. Ending all about grasping and not grasping. Not grasping for both grasping and not grasping. If grasping and not grasping is still there, then it's not ending. It's the same as cutting and not cutting. That is still practicing, the desire practicing. practicing the opinions.
ฉะนั้นถ้าไม่ก็ไม่มันทั้งไม่ทั้งไม่ไม่นั่นแหละ
Therefore, cut to both cut and not cut, it will end both.
ไม่ทั้งไม่ไม่
End both cutting and not cutting.
เรียกว่าไม่เอาทั้งตัวไม่ไม่เอาทั้ง
Not
ตัว
grasping both cutting and not cutting.
สิ่งที่ไม่มีขอบเขต
That which has no limits
ที่สุดไม่มีประมาณ
and infinite.
เอาไปแค่อะไรก็ต้องตายอยู่
When there is a limitation, then there is being stuck with the limitations.
ไม่มีแง่ไม่มีมุม
There is no opinions and angles of opinions.
มีขอบเขตไม่มีที่สุด
No limits. Infinite has no
แค่
limitations to opinions.
มันมีแค่มันก็ประมาณ
When there is a limitation that is just
อันนี้มันไม่มี
taking into account with just limitations,
ที่สุดก็ไม่
this is infinite, no ends,
ขอบเขตก็ไม่มี
not countable, no limits,
ทั้งตัวไม่มี
no boundaries, not having, even the not having itself, that has no boundaries. It's called infinite,
ประมาณไหนประมาณไม่มีประมาณ
not taking into account, uncountable, infinite.
แต่นั่นเองตัวที่สร้างปัญหา
Therefore, the one that creates problems is the practice itself.
ตัวที่เป็นปัญหาคือตัวบำเพ็ญเนี่ยเพราะมันเป็นปัญหาในตัวบำเพ็ญ
Because there is the desire in the practice, that's why it's a problem. The practice itself is the problem.
มันก็ไปสร้างตัวยึดตัวไม่ยึดขึ้นมานั่นแหละตัวปัญหา
It creates the attachment and non-attachment. That's the problem.
ทั้งมีทั้งไม่มี
That which has
ไม่มีคือ
no there is or no there is not.
ปัญหานั่นเอง
But the desire
บูรณาการที่ถูก
forming the opinions to practice,
ตัวยุ่ง
that is the one that is the troublemaker.
ตัวยุ่ง
The troublemaker.
ตัวยุ่งแล้วก็ยุ่งกับตัว
And then being busy with oneself.
มันมีถอยก็ถอยมันทั้งตัวถอยตัวไม่ถอย
If there is the stepping back, then step back for both stepping back and not stepping back.
ไม่ไม่
If there is might, then might to both might and not might.
ถอยก็ถอยมันทั้งตัวถอยตัวไม่
Step back from both stepping back and not stepping back, so that there is nothing left as stepping back or not stepping back.
อยู่มันยังเป็นภาระ
If there is still blossoming and closing, it's still a burden. If there is having and not having, just remind yourself not having both having and not having. that which has there is, which hasn't there is, or that isn't already. Therefore, don't create a new opinion about there is or there isn't. Don't try to not having the there isn't again. There isn't, even the there isn't already. Don't create there isn't in your opinion, because that is the desire overlaying having and not having, there is or there isn't. Don't try to make the mind to be empty in whatever ways. The emptiness doesn't exist as it already is, so don't create the emptiness in certain ways. That is samsara, the way of samsara. The desire trying to reform opinions. Emptiness doesn't exist. Emptiness doesn't exist. Trying to be empty, what is it? It's actually not empty. In the emptiness, it's not empty actually, with opinions. Emptiness doesn't exist. Trying to be empty, it means that it's not empty. The desire inciting, the desire practices, the desire cultivates. Therefore, if there isn't, then there isn't both there is or there isn't. If cut, then cut, both cutting and not cutting. Do not have anything left about cutting or not cutting. Cut, both cutting and not cutting. Trying to cut is not cutting. It's not true cutting. If cut, then cut, both cutting and not cutting, so that there is nothing left as cutting or not cutting. If cut, then cut, both cutting and not cutting, so that there is nothing left as cutting or not cutting. Trying to cut, then is not true cutting, because there is the self that trying to cut. It's not true cutting. If not attached, then not attached to both attachment and non-attachment. There should not be anything left as attachment or non-attachment. If there is still something left as attachment and non-attachment, that is suffering act, practicing the suffering act. All types of practice is the suffering act. All types of cultivating is itself the act of the suffering, self-torture in the practice. Everything is from not grasping, both grasping and not grasping. not cutting both, cutting and not cutting. This ends the burdens in trying to begin or to end, trying to be free or to be bound, ending the burdens of trying to let go or not letting go. If cutting, then cutting both cutting and not cutting, so that it will end all about trying to begin or to end. What is it that is trying to begin or to end? That is trying to cut or not cut. That is the attempt to begin and to end. Cut to both cut and not cut. Trying to cut and not cut is actually trying to begin and to end. Let's end this. End both cutting and not cutting. Ending all about trying to begin and to end. End all about trying to cut and not cut. Cleansing in the way of infinite, all the time and forever. The great compassion of purifying through the extinction and emptiness forever and ever. If cut, then cut both cutting and not cutting, so that there is nothing left as cutting or not cutting. It turns into the infinity that cleanses accordingly. The practice is itself the troublemaker. Whether it is the worldly way or Dharma way, it is creating the trends of karma, favor in karma only. Whether it is in worldly or Dharma, it is self-torture, practicing suffering act. The practice itself, it is the self-torture, suffering act in the practice itself. This is by itself that doesn't dissolve itself, therefore it becomes karma within itself. When oneself doesn't dissolve oneself, it becomes karma, suffering acts within oneself. Cut to both cut and not cut. It will dissolve the attempt to begin and to end. Ending the mission. This is not about practicing to end the mission, ending the mission itself. Practice ending is itself suffering act. End the ending itself. The practice itself the troublemaker, whether it is in the worldly way or Dharma way. The desire inciting the state of mind, state of Dharma, inciting to create the desire, wanting to get, to gain, to become. Just cut, both cutting and not cutting.
จะได้ไม่เหลือ
so that there is nothing left as cutting or not cutting, cut to both cut and not cut. So that it is not going to be the self trying to begin and to end, to arise and to cease. So that it will not become the attempt to begin and to end, to arise and to cease. The attempt to begin and to end is actually the self-torture. Trying to cut is not true cutting. It's not true cutting within the cutting itself. Cut, both cut and not cut. Trying to cut is actually trying to arise and to cease. Cut, both cutting and not cutting. And Paul is telling us again and again, telling us again and again like this. Cut, both cutting and not cutting. If you stuck with just cutting and not cutting, that is still the attempt to arise and to cease. It is still self-torture. Cut, both cutting and not cutting. Nothing is left as cutting or not cutting. So that nothing is left as cutting or not cutting. Cut, both cutting and not cutting. There is no overlaying of the grasping. Nothing is left as cutting or not cutting automatically. Nothing is left as cutting or not cutting. Mai to both mai and not mai is not an overlaying of the grasping all by itself. If you try to mai or to cut, there is still grasping for cutting. That is overlaying of the desire. Grasping that is overlays the mind. There is no such thing as cutting or not cutting. If you are stuck with just cutting and not cutting, then there is cutting and not cutting already. Nibbana doesn't have cutting or not cutting, mai or not mai, grasping or not grasping, or attachment or non-attachment. Nibbana doesn't have there is or there isn't, existing or not existing. There is because there is grasping mind. There is cutting because there is grasping for cutting. There is the not grasping that is overlaid by the desire. Nibbana doesn't have grasping or not grasping. Not grasping, both grasping and not grasping, so that there is nothing left as grasping or not grasping. Grasping and not grasping is the arising and the ceasing. Not grasping for both grasping and not grasping, automatically there is nothing left as grasping or not grasping, ending automatically for both arising and ceasing. It's not just about nothing is there. There is no such a thing as nothing or something. There is or there isn't. If you think that there is nothing, actually there is the opinions about there isn't anything. If you feel that there is nothing there, actually there is the feelings that with the opinions there isn't, there is, or there isn't. This is the terminologies that dissolve themselves, and the beginning dissolved itself, the arising dissolved itself. The practice of Kamasthana and Vipassana is actually self-torture. The practice itself is self-torture, is anicca, dukkha, anatta within itself. The enlightenment is directly given, and there is no cutting accordingly, directly. Instead, they follow with the practice. That is the way of the suffering. That's why it's called self-torture. It's turned into self-torture. Just cut, both cutting and not cutting. That is directly ending itself. Cut the cutting itself directly. Don't let the desire create the path of the practice. It's called self-torture. The desire creates it. The desire also take on its result. The desire also going to hell and heaven. But desire cannot go to Nibbana. The desire is the creator and the one that takes on the creation, and it's the one that goes to heaven and to hell. But desire has never go to Nibbana, because Nibbana doesn't allow the desire to go there, except that there is no desire. The practice sending oneself to hell and heaven. But Nibbana, the practice cannot go there. Sa eng, by oneself, by itself, then Nibbana can happen. Sa eng, cut, both cutting and not cutting by itself, ending both the ending and not ending. Ending, or about ending and not ending. Ending both, ending and not ending. Ending both, trying to end and not trying to end. And together all at once, because there is no separating line. If there is no creator, there is no separating line. It's at once, all together, everything. Cut, both cutting and not cutting, so that it will end the one who try to cut and not cutting. No separation, no division. no creator, no practitioner, no realms of existence.
ตัวผู้ปฏิบัติคือตัวผู้สร้างภพสร้างภูมิ
The creator is the one that creates realms of existence.
ก็ไม่มีสังสารวัฏ
The creator and the practitioner creates
ตัวผู้สร้างตัวปฏิบัติ
realms of existence,
หรือว่าทางโลกหรือทาง
whether it's worldly way or spiritual way.
แม้แต่การเคยว่างก็ยัง
Even trying to be empty, it is samsara within itself. It is the desire creates the emptiness.
ไม่มีตัวผู้ปฏิบัติมันก็ไม่มี
If there is no practitioner, then there is no realms of existence, there is no samsara. Whether it's the practice of the worldly or spiritually body or mind, any practices are samsara within the practicing itself. It creates some samsara of realms of existence that follows, cycle of circling back and forth that follows. Just cut both cutting and not cutting.
จะได้หมดทั้งตัวใครจบ
So that it will end all about the attempt to end or not ending. So that it will end all the attempt to extinguish or not.
จะได้หมดทั้งตัวใครเริ่ม
So that it will end the attempt to begin and to end. Let's end all about grasping and not grasping, cutting or not cutting. Let's end all about attachment and non-attachment. That which is infinite, all at once, right away, all at once, giving the infinite without limits.